Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the Clacks Women for Independence podcast. Music this week is from White Sand and it's called The Legend of the King. We didn't manage to get an episode last week because it was the Believe in Scotland conference that weekend, and Indie Live Radio and Independence Live were doing the production and the presenting on Saturday of that conference. So that took up pretty much the whole weekend with prep doing it, so we didn't get much else done. But look forward to seeing some of the outputs from that conference. It was a very interesting discussion, and hopefully we'll be able to bring you some of the material from that over the next week or so. We've been absolutely spoiled for COVID news this week, haven't we? Extension of some of the lockdown restrictions. We also have definitive proof that just being rich and powerful and famous doesn't actually protect you from the virus, because Trump and Mrs. Trump have gone down with it. And unlike half of Twitter, I actually wish him a speedy recovery because I want to see his face when he loses the presidential election. Can't do that if he's on a respirator. So get well soon, Trump. And of course the other COVID-related faux pas, own goal, whatever you want to call it, Margaret Ferrier. And again, as much as I hope Margaret Ferrier makes a speedy recovery also, I hope she listened in to the First Minister's briefing on Friday when she had to field question after question after question. And there was no doubt that the First Minister was rightly raging. Here's what she had to say.
I want to stress again how important it is that all of us self-isolate when we are asked to do so. Obviously, I can't do that today without first addressing the issue of Margaret Ferrier, the SNP MP who travelled by train to London and attended the House of Commons after taking a test when she should have been self-isolating, and who then travelled back to Scotland by train after being told that her test was positive. Now, Margaret is a friend of mine, so everything I'm about to say is obviously with the heaviest of hearts. And of course, I wish her a speedy recovery from COVID. But none of that changes the fact that her actions were reckless, dangerous and completely indefensible. And I feel very angry on behalf of all of you. Every single day I stand here and I ask you to make horrendous sacrifices as part of our collective efforts against COVID. And it's really important, whether you agree with me or not, whether you love me or loathe me, that you can have confidence in the advice that I give you. And that means me being clear that the rules apply to everyone, regardless of who you are and regardless of what your political allegiance is. Trust me, it's one of the easiest things in the world in politics to call for tough consequences when one of your opponents breaks the rules. That's not hard for any of us. The litmus test, though, is whether you're prepared to do the same when it's one of your own breaking the rules. And in these abnormal times, when everybody has been asked to do difficult things, I think that is more important than ever. That's why the SNP whip has been withdrawn from Margaret, and that is the most serious sanction a party can impose on an elected representative. I've also spoken to her directly and made crystal clear to her that I think she should now resign as an MP. Now, people contact me and say, why don't you just sack her? And this is a point that I have to make clear. I don't have the power to force an MP to step down. No party leader has that power. But I can make my views known, difficult though it is, and I have done so. And I hope she will come to the right decision in the interests of the overall integrity of these vital public health messages.
But if we thought there was any danger that the Associated Press Corps would leave it there, no, of course they wouldn't. In fact, there was an awful lot more of them than there normally are, scenting blood.
Gerard Tubb from Sky.
The Margaret Ferrier incident.
Gordon Cree from STV.
Just on Margaret Ferrier.
Liz Bates from Channel 4.
Yeah, so back to Margaret Ferrier.
Katrina Renton from the BBC.
I was going to ask you about Margaret Ferrier.
Vina from ITV.
Why should anyone in the general public listen to what you've been saying when one of your own MPs is...
Phil McDonald from Global.
Just to return to the Margaret Ferrier situation.
Neil Pooran from PA.
On Margaret Ferrier.
Chris Green from iNews.
As you have said, you can't sack Margaret Ferrier.
Michael Blackley from the Daily Mail.
Given that Margaret Ferrier has...
Tom Peterkin from the Press and Journal.
In your conversation with Margaret Ferrier.
Christine Lavelle from The Sun.
On your conversation with Margaret Ferrier.
Simon Johnson from The Telegraph.
Regarding expulsion.
Muir Dickey from the Financial Times.
On the question of whether or not to expel Margaret Ferrier.
Now, the First Minister, as she always does, managed to present herself in the best possible light. And I have seen quite a few comments around social media today commending her for that act of leadership. And I think that's right. But the thing that's so annoying about Margaret Ferrier's actions, apart from the risk to the travelling public and the people she came in contact with and diluting the public health messages, while every single one of those journalists was focused on how the First Minister felt about Margaret Ferrier, none of them are paying any attention to the internal market issue, the fact that Westminster intends to breach international law, the fact it intends to breach the Treaty of Union, the fact that it is looking to withdraw from important parts of the Human Rights Act, and also the fact that the EU has initiated legal action against the UK for its breach of international law. Now, those are all huge topics, completely blown off the front pages by Margaret's actions. You have to question whether somebody whose judgment is lacking to that degree, whether they're fit at all to be an MP. So let's have a look at some of the other news that was coming from Westminster and the wider world in relation to the Internal Market Bill and the rogue UK state. We'll start with what I thought was a great little speech from Mhairi Black in the Internal Market debate. She sets out really clearly just how damaging this bill is and just how blatantly it tramples all over Holyrood's authority.
Devolution has allowed us in Scotland to carve out a path that is different to that of the rest of the UK, wherever necessary, for the last 20 years. And to understand exactly how this bill attacks devolution, you only need to read clause 46. States that a Minister of the Crown may provide financial assistance to any person for infrastructure. Section 2 goes on to say infrastructure includes health, education, transport, court and prison facilities, housing, water, electricity, the provision of heat. This bill allows ministers, UK ministers, to dictate and spend money wherever they like in whatever devolved area they want, as long as it can be justified as they deem it to directly or indirectly benefit any area of the UK. And we already know that the reality of that means Tory governments funneling millions into marginal Tory seats as opposed to the areas that actually need it. But I thought, why specifically include things like heat and electricity and water? And then I remembered, for instance, the only reason that we are able to have publicly owned fresh water in Scotland is because the Scottish Parliament has made it so. This bill explicitly gives any Minister of the Crown permission to run riot with the very assets of Scotland that our Scottish Parliament has protected. And nowhere in the bill, nowhere does it state that permission must be obtained from the devolved governments in order to do so. Now, I have watched this Parliament hand £40 million for ferries to a company that didn't own any ferries. Are we really supposed to expect and rely on this government to spend money on our behalf? And let's be clear, this would not be some benevolent donation to Scotland from Westminster, because clause 47 says that financial assistance may be subject to conditions including repayment. We'll be expected to pay back money that we never even spent. It's like being asked to take out a car loan even though you can't drive. To those who say that we are represented here and that we can change things, I say this: we have tried and we are outvoted at every turn. And this gets to the crux of why independence is the only option left for Scotland. For context, Scotland has 59 MPs. The City of London, the city, has 73 MPs. This is a union that England dominates. The only reason there isn't an English Parliament is because the people in Westminster view this place as the English Parliament, and we can't afford to be naive. The only way to protect our Parliament is to become independent. Now, we regularly hear the Tories brag about how we have the most powerful, devolved Parliament in the world, but I've got a new thing for them to brag about. The UK is actually in the Guinness World Book of Records as the country from which most countries have gained independence. Since 1939, 62 countries have gained independence from Westminster, and not a single one has asked to come back. Only one country has decided to stay, and look where we are. In 2014, the idea of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister was a warning. Now it's a reality. Now, to finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill provides a framework to allow Westminster to bypass our Scottish Parliament in the hope that we don't notice. But we are noticing. It took us 300 years to get our Scottish Parliament and 20 years for this place to put a bulldozer right through it.
And Joanna Cherry, who memorably this week referred to Suella Braverman, the Attorney General's Ladybird Book of International Law, explained that this goes even wider than just the impact on devolution. Here's Joanna.
I rise to speak in favour of the amendments 43 and 44 tabled in my name, and also to give my support to the amendments tabled in the name of the Scottish National Party and our friends from the SDLP and our friend from the Alliance Party. Sir Graham, I'm going to focus my comments mainly on my amendments, which are laid to try and work out just how far this government are prepared to go in ousting the jurisdiction of the domestic courts in relation to judicial review and review under the Human Rights Act in clause 45 as it appears on the face of the bill. And I also wish to highlight, as I mentioned in an intervention on the Minister earlier, that insofar as clause 45 seeks to restrict judicial review in Scotland by circumscribing the supervisory jurisdiction of the Court of Session, not only does this trespass into devolved territory, but it may very well also breach another treaty, the Treaty of Union between Scotland and England, Article 19 of which preserves the independence of the Scottish legal system. But, Sir Graham, for the avoidance of doubt, before I address my amendments in detail, my primary position is, and I find myself curiously here on the same ground as the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, my primary position is that clauses 41 to 45 should not stand part of this bill. And for everything we heard from the previous speaker, I think was designed to hide from us the fact that what we are talking about here is a bilateral treaty that was entered into by the Prime Minister and by the United Kingdom less than a year ago to deal with a specific situation that arose between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and the part which was the most controversial was the part dealing with Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland. And this is the part which this government are seeking to drive a coach and horses through. That's what we're talking about, and that is what is so wrong. Such excuses as those of the government's law officers who remain in post have sought to make for this do not stand up. And I have to say that I'm very proud as a member of the Scottish Bar that Lord Keane of Ely resigned last week, and I'm proud of the reasons he gave for his resignation. The only thing I would say to him is, what took you so long, Richard? But apart from that, I'm very proud, and I think it will be very difficult for the British government to find anybody of suitable seniority from the Scottish Bar to step into his shoes. But I'm waiting with some amusement to see who they might find. Anyway, talking of rather less senior lawyers than Lord Keane of Ely, the English Attorney General has said that the English doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty means that it's lawful for the United Kingdom to override these obligations signed up to in the withdrawal agreement. I think that's what the previous speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman, was saying when he referred to Section 28 of the EU Withdrawal Act. This idea that the English doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty somehow trumps international law. It's legally illiterate.
Indeed.
It's what we would call at the Scottish Bar a load of old mints. And that's not just the view, that's not just my view, it's not my view, it's, as I said earlier in an intervention, the view of the United Kingdom Supreme Court, who said in the first Miller case, at paragraph 55, treaties between sovereign states have effect in international law and are not governed by the domestic law of any state. So I'm terribly sorry to disappoint the members opposite. No matter how much you love your doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, no matter how much it means to you, it cannot trump the obligations freely entered into by your government under international law. It just simply doesn't work that way. Britannia doesn't rule the waves any longer and hasn't done so for some time. Now, I regret to say that whilst I have, and I really mean this, the greatest respect for the honourable and learned member for Bromley and Chislehurst, and the highest regard for him, the government amendment which his efforts have secured is wholly inadequate to meet both domestic and international concerns about this bill. And I cannot really do much better than quote what the Irish Foreign Minister has said this afternoon. He said a government with an 80-seat majority having a parliamentary lock is not much of a reassurance to any of us. And I really don't think I need to say it any more than that. It's, once more, it's a ruse to solve the problems of the party opposite, rather than a ruse to address our international legal obligations. But turning to my amendments 43 and 44, as I said, they seek to deal with clause 45. And I'd like to quote what the Bar Council, the English Bar Council and the Law Society of England and Wales have said about clause 45. They've said, as it appears on the face of the bill, it would exclude judicial review of any regulations made under clause 42 or 43 on the grounds of incompatibility with domestic law as well as international law. And that exclusion of judicial review would mean also excluding any human rights review under the Human Rights Act or indeed the Equality Act. And as my honourable friend, the member for Belfast South, said in her very eloquent speech earlier, human rights are of course integral to the Good Friday Agreement. And it's a travesty that regulations made under 42 and 43 should not be subject to judicial review or to human rights review across Great Britain, but a particular travesty in Northern Ireland. It undermines not just the principle of the rule of law, but the principle of access to justice. And it also contravenes Article 4 of the Withdrawal Agreement, which the British government freely signed up to, in which the British government undertook to ensure a right for individuals to directly rely upon withdrawal agreement provisions. Now, it is difficult to be certain, Sir Graham, how the courts would attempt what is on the face of the bill in clause 45, how the courts would interpret an ouster clause like this, but precedent suggests it would be quite hard for the courts to hold it up unless it's expressed in unequivocal terms. But my amendments seek to clear this up by stating in 43 that the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights are excluded from the definition of domestic and international law, and by saying in Amendment 44 that nothing in clause 45 ousts the jurisdiction of the domestic courts in respect of judicial review of regulations made under clauses 42 and 43. Now, subsequent to my tabling those amendments, the Government tabled their amendments 64 and 65, and these appear to me to be an acknowledgement that judicial review claims could still be brought in certain limited circumstances. Now, I'd be interested to hear from the Minister what those circumstances would be. Do they include just the normal judicial review grounds of illegality, irrationality or procedural impropriety? Or will he also include review on the grounds of human rights? So I look forward to hearing from on that. But my final point is this, Sir Graham, and it's from a Scottish point of view, it's the most important point. Insofar as Clause 45 seeks to interfere with judicial review in Scotland, it is interfering with rather a different beast from judicial review in England. It's interfering with the inherent supervisory jurisdiction of the Court of Session in Edinburgh. And in doing that, it's straying into devolved territory and therefore would require a legislative consent motion, which I very much doubt would be forthcoming. Put quite simply, Sir Graham, the Scottish Parliament is not in the business of ousting the court's jurisdiction on judicial review or human rights grounds, nor should it be, and nor should this Parliament. But perhaps most importantly, from a Scottish point of view, Sir Graham, the supervisory jurisdiction of the Court of Session is an inherent jurisdiction. It's not something that's conferred on it by legislation. It has been there since the inception of the court in 1532. Therefore, it predates the Treaty of Union between Scotland and England in 1707, and legislation seeking to narrow the scope of that inherent jurisdiction risks falling foul of Article 19 of the Treaty of Union, which preserves the independence of Scotland's legal system. Now, in Scotland, we learned rather to our surprise from the UK Supreme Court that putting the Sewell Convention on a legal footing had no impact in protecting us from the government driving a coach and horses through it. So this government, it seems, can, as the legal position stands in the United Kingdom at the moment, get away with passing primary legislation which interferes in devolved matters without a legislative consent motion. But breach of Article 19 of the Treaty of Union might be a different matter, because the question of whether certain parts of the Treaty of Union are so fundamental that they can't be overridden by an act of this Parliament has been considered by the courts north and south of the border, but it's never been entirely resolved. And I would simply remind members of this House that the doctrine of supremacy of Parliament is an English doctrine.
Indeed.
And even Dicey, the great high priest of parliamentary sovereignty, was prepared to recognise that those who framed the Treaty of Union between Scotland and England believed in the possibility of creating an absolute sovereign legislature which was still bound by certain unalterable laws. And many of us in Scotland believe that one of the unalterable laws of the Treaty of Union is that this Parliament cannot interfere with the inherent jurisdiction of the Court of Session. And both of these problems, the inroads into the devolved competence, the undermining of Article 19 of the Treaty of Union, will continue, notwithstanding government amendments 64 and 65. Now, I suspect the government haven't really thought about this because, let's be honest, they don't think very often about the impact of what they want to do in Scotland. But many people in Scotland, including members of my profession, the legal profession in Scotland, will see this as just another example of this government's total disregard for devolution and total disregard for Scotland's separate and distinct institutions. And Sir Graham, that's yet another reason why the only way out of the mess that the Conservative and Unionist Party have created over Europe, the only way out for Scotland is independence. And I'm just glad that so many more people in Scotland are realising this on a daily basis. And I know it's a terrible, dreadful bore for the members opposite, but I would just remind them, we have to spend an awful lot of time listening to them bang on about the European Union and how the European Union, how the European Union prevents them from having their way. Well, the Scots are pretty sick, Sir Graham, of this Parliament preventing Scotland from having its way. And mock away, if you will, and I don't mean you, Sir Graham, mock away on the benches opposite. Feel free to continue your mocking. Your mocking is viewed in Scotland, and it simply feeds the desire for Scotland to go a different way. So keep up the mocking. It's helping my party's cause, and it's helping the cause of my country.
And more legal trouble for the UK government from the EU, as Ursula von der Leyen explains, in the most diplomatic manner possible.
As you know, we had invited our British friends to remove the problematic parts of their draft internal market bill by the end of September. This draft bill is, by its very nature, a breach of the obligation of good faith laid down in the withdrawal agreement. Moreover, if adopted as is, it will be in full contradiction to the Protocol of Ireland, Northern Ireland. The deadline lapsed yesterday. The problematic provisions have not been removed. Therefore, this morning, the Commission has decided to send a letter of formal notice to the UK government. This is the first step in an infringement procedure. The letter invites the UK government to send its observations within a month. And besides this, the Commission will continue to work hard towards a full and timely implementation of the withdrawal agreement. We stand by our commitments. Thank you.
So there you go. The UK is now keeping company with Belarus, Turkey and China. Talk about a rogue state. Closer to home now, and this week Clacks Women for Independence member Lynn had a haircut. But not just any old haircut. This one was for a very good cause. Let's hear some more.
Well, I've had two friends who throughout kind of one before just before lockdown and one during lockdown who have lost their hair as part of their treatment for cancers that they had. So one had breast cancer and the other one has had a rare fast-growing cancer which has impacted on all her reproductive organs. So when they lost their hair, and I thought, well, what can I do to help out a wee bit? And a couple of times before, I've donated my hair, had my hair cut and donated it to a charity called Little Princess Trust, and they make wigs for children that have lost their hair through illness. So I thought, well, I could do that again. And the last time I'd done it, somebody suggested, why don't you do it for charity? People will actually, donate to that. So I thought, well, that's what I'll do. Because I've had two friends that are dealing with cancer, I'll do that. So set up a wee GoFundMe, and obviously one of the friends had breast cancer. The other friend, I said to her, what would she like me to do? And she said, well, she's another big independent supporter, so said anything for independence. So that's why I thought, right, okay, we'll go for Indie Live Radio, because I think the radio is really important. It's becoming more and more important as a form of communicating, for lots of people. So that's what I did. I set up a GoFundMe, and I did that because you can look at like different ways of doing it, different platforms, but just giving the money, the charity has to be kind of registered with Just Giving. I couldn't pick what I wanted. Like, so if Indie Live wasn't registered with Just Giving, I couldn't have done it through that. So I just set up a GoFundMe. There's kind of pros and cons to it, because if it's a Just Giving, you can declare you're a taxpayer. This way I could just do one fundraiser and split what I raised between the two. So that's what I did. So I set it up, I think it was last Wednesday I put it on, and pretty quickly I set the target at £500, and basically within the first day I'd gone over that. So I upped my goal again up to £1,000. So yesterday I think I went to £1,010. So that's what's been raised. They'll take money off that because they charge fees and transact. But a few people have also given me kind of cash in hand. Neighbours and a couple of friends have just put it straight into my bank account. So that saved a wee bit on the fees. So overall, yeah, there's still what I had cash in hand has made up for the fees that GoFundMe have taken off. So this morning, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I've just donated £505 to Indie Live Radio.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And there'll be £505 going to breast cancer. I'm just making sure, I'm waiting to contact the charity because I wanted it specifically to be a fund to go to breast cancer research in Scotland, because I know there are research projects happening. So I just want to make sure I donate to the right place. Because you do hear of people who leave money in their wills to they think they've left it to this Scottish Society for the Protection of Animals, and it's gone to the RSPCA, and the money's doesn't benefit their local cat protection or whatever they actually wanted it to go to. I'm just waiting to get a call back from the breast cancer charity to find out where exactly I donate to.
So how long was your hair?
Surprisingly long, because it was always tied up, so people never really knew how long it was. But I measured, because they want the ponytails, they want to be no shorter than 7 inches long, because when they make the wigs with real hair, they've got to kind of pull it through and knot it on the inside of it, so they need it to be a reasonable length. And
so when I photograph in your on Facebook, and your hair was really long.
So I think the ponytails, because I got it cut in sort of 3 ponytails, 2 at the sides and 1 at the back, and they were probably about 14 inches long, so they should be able to use that to make a kind of long length wig.
I must say, I think your short haircut looks fantastic.
I have had people say, "Oh, you look so different. You look much younger." I've also had from my son who's just walked in, "You look like a boy, Mum."
Oh, no, I think you look great. You want to would still be able to contribute if they go to your GoFundMe page, and it's entitled Lynne, that's spelled Lynne, Lynne's Haircut for Breast Cancer and Indie Live Radio is what it's titled, and it's on GoFundMe.
If you're wondering who the other voices were on that clip, it was Valerie and Marlene from the Indie Live Radio daytime show. And just to confirm that Lynne's GoFundMe page is still open if you'd like to support breast cancer and Indie Live Radio. There's funds being split between them. And then, as often happens, the conversation turned to yes stones and yes slates. So let's hear the rest of the interview.
The yes slates, that is really wonderful. I watched a video recently, I think you were in it, with Fiona McGregor from Clack Manager Women for Independence. And also, you quite often feature, I think, in the Clacks Women for Independence virtual coffee chat, don't you?
Yeah.
That's a great programme that for any listeners on a Tuesday, and it's repeated at various times. You can check on the schedule, but on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock, the Clack Manager Women for Indie have their podcast goes out, and it's really great. And I think you're in that quite a bit, aren't you?
Yeah, I have to say, I listen to it and I go, oh, I'll need to be more, listen more next week than talk.
I didn't mean that. But Fiona and yourself were involved in making a video of the yes slates, and it went round each one.
Yes.
What is it? Yes to Scottish yes to independence for Scotland, is that?
Yes slates for Scotland, and what the slates say is yes, 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 independence for Scotland.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I can't remember the exact wording.
The phrase,
the video takes you through each letter individually and lets you see the beautiful artwork, and it's the product of artists from all over the country, all over Scotland, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just a shame. The plan was that after we kind of launched it in January, we took it down to the Borders and did a wee kind of open air display of it down there.
Yeah.
But then obviously the pandemics come in, so it's kind of curtailed activity, because the plan was to take it to the marches, to take it to various places and show it off, and then hopefully at some point, maybe get to take it to galleries or museums or yes hubs, and leave it for a couple of weeks for people to see. So we haven't managed to do that, and I don't know when we're going to be able to do that. I mean, when we did it with Fiona a couple of weeks ago in Clackman, and that's because somebody very kindly lent us their front car park, which is quite big, so we could set it up there, we could be socially distanced and people could see it if they were walking past. What I have done is I've created a mini version of it, So I took photographs of all the slates, shrunk them down, and we actually made a frame and we've glued it on. So in fact, today my husband is away to Holyrood, just to hang about at the front of Holyrood with the mini slates on display for anyone walking past. And he's meeting another friend that was involved in it, that he put a couple of slates into, and he's taken a couple of flags down. So the pair of them will be doing their bit out at the front of Holyrood today.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I that we couldn't find somewhere for it to be on display a bit more permanently, because it is worth people seeing all the creativity and idea, the ingenuity that's gone into it. I just love it.
Yeah, well, we're hoping kind of that. I mean, it was great that there were so many people involved in it from all over the country. As I say, we've had people down in the borders, people up in Buckie, Pennycook, Oban, all across the country. That was a bit of a kind of logistic nightmare, getting all these slates together in the first place. And we were thinking, there's now, as I say, nearly 8,000 people on the Yes Stones group, that maybe people in a more condensed geographical area, maybe Yes Aberdeenshire, would think, oh, well, let's get some stoners in Aberdeenshire all together and they could do it, or they could put something together.
Just making me think, it's just another example, isn't it, about how, given the situation now with COVID in the country, that we're all just having to try and think of different ways of getting the message out and how to do it, and by obviously keeping to the whatever COVID regulations and restrictions are in place at the time. But it's quite a challenge.
Well, we'd managed to get a holiday up in Skye, so we had a week up in Skye.
I saw your photos on Facebook.
So that was the mini slate. The mini slates were taken around Skye and photographed in lovely picturesque locations. And the place we were actually staying in, and one of the days I'd shown it to one of my friends that runs a wee shop and a pod, like a wee cafe, outdoor cafe. So she said, just put it up in front there, because there was, quite a few people coming along to take the wee boat trip over to Carusk. So we actually screwed it into the front of her cafeteria decking for the day, and left it there, and had people looking at it and asking questions, and one man tried to buy it. We're like, it's very kind of you, but it's not for sale.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the way to go, isn't it? To get local connections and putting it up for a few days, people see it, maybe take away a leaflet or something. But presumably the small sized one, you could have, if it's from photos, you could have as many of them as you want, couldn't you?
You could eventually, but I mean, the small size one, when I call it the mini slates, it's still 5 foot long by a foot tall.
I remember.
The full size one is about 14 feet long by 5 feet tall. So
and very heavy.
Yeah, we've been talking about perhaps getting. Somebody suggested, why don't you get it printed out and make a table runner?
Well, that's a good idea. I would buy one of them.
Yeah, or tea towels or postcards or something. Because again, we're always looking, like yourselves. We've always got to raise funds. We don't have dark money backing us, do we? We're looking for some light money.
It also raises the profile of independence in a very positive way.
Yes, yeah.
And those, I mean, the art, like Val was just saying, the artwork on those stones, on slates, is just, it's not just someone getting out and doing a wee quick painting on a bit of stone. I mean, they are so beautifully done and so creative. Actually, I was stunned when I saw some of them. So Lynn, how are you feeling yourself? Are you feeling more optimistic or about independence coming, or what do you think?
Well, yes and no. I certainly see a lot more people from the sort of few interactions that you're managing to have and talking to people, that a lot more people are a lot more positive about Scotland and about the ability of Scotland to manage our own affairs, and seeing how the pandemic's been handled differently. They're much happier that they're living in Scotland. So yeah, that's good. But then the flip side is everything else that's going on with the internal market bill and all, thinking, what's going to happen with New Waverley House. Is that, is Holyrood going to be shut on the 1st of January? And that's a real concern as well.
It is indeed. And I was at a talk just the other day by Heather Anderson, who's a councillor down the border. She's also an organic farmer. She's talking about the implications of the internal market bill, and we were all aghast at it.
I was reading an article a couple of days ago, and it was people from car manufacturing, from pharmaceuticals, and from chemical industries talking about the implications to their industries. And it's just horrific, saying, and there's lots of pharmaceuticals aren't just brought into UK, they're also exported, and what's going to happen now is they're going to have to be retested as to get approval in the EU, whereas they weren't before.
Yeah, and it's a big topic. It was probably a bit unwise of me to bring it in right when we're coming up to the end of the show, but it happens to be.
So that's nearly it for this week. We had hoped to take part in a Bridges for Indy event on Saturday with Yes Clacks, but unfortunately the weather was just awful. A storm had come in from somewhere, so we had to cancel. But on Sunday, we got a window of beautiful autumn sunshine, so we just put the call out that whoever was available, come and join us on the bridge. We did an hour, we got some great feedback as ever. That bridge is also very popular with cyclists. And we did do a very unscientific poll of who seemed to be supporting us and who wasn't. So out of probably about 20 all told, about 25% of them were hatchet-faced, miserable, dare straight ahead and cycle, or shaking their heads. And the other 75% either smiled, some of them said Sir Alba, and generally seemed to be in favour of what we were doing. So there you go. And if anybody wants to know what it sounds like standing on a bridge, doing a Bridges for Indy event, it sounds a bit like this.
I know it was a good one. It was both of them, the passenger and the...
And you thinking you're a working class guy?
The ones for the low tax and low... They don't work together. And then lemons never need to go out. Place called. Oh, the top was gone.
The last word this week to Ian Blackford, because that man stands up in Westminster day in, day out, fighting our corner, taking the most awful jibes and goading and mocking, and he rarely raises his voice, he never loses his dignity. And he had a 27-minute speech, which I'm not going to be able to reproduce because it was too long for the podcast, but definitely worth watching if you want to see Ian in action. And it just seems to be standard practice now that any SNP MP ends their speech on whatever topic with a reminder that we would be better off as an independent country. And Ian went one better this week. He actually got some Gaelic into Hansard. Thanks for listening, as always. Do get in touch with us if you'd like to. The last word to Ian Blackford.
Over the last number of years, Scotland's people have watched on as Westminster ignored our views on Brexit, launched power grab after power grab and undermined our democratic rights. This legislation is the last straw. It leaves us with only one option and only one choice. A growing and consistent majority of our people have now come to the same conclusion. They know that the only way to defend Scotland's parliaments and powers is through independence. Madam Deputy Speaker, the words of Charles Stewart Parnell, who used to sit just 2 rows back here, still ring true. Tonight I direct these words to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, and I will do this 2 lines in Gaelic and then give an English translation. Hanil Corieg dunya chruchen a chuet un ustis duha. Hanil Corieg dun a histe a huchi wish. Yev shiv hufada risho agus hanai and batshu. Madam Deputy Speaker, no man has the right to fix the boundary to the march of a nation. No man has the right to say to his country, "Thus far thou shalt go and no further." Hear, hear.